Hi, this is ESPN's Dave Lamont, and you're listening to the Sports Objective Podcast, the unofficial podcast of the Pirates.
Welcome into the Sports Objective. We appreciate everyone tuning in here on a Tuesday night as we are talking East Carolina Pirate football. And tonight we're joined by a familiar face, and that is the play-by-play voice of the Tulane Green Wave, Corey Gloor. Corey, we appreciate your time this evening.
Good evening, Sports Objective. Pleasure to be back with you.
Absolutely. Corey joining myself in addition to guest co-host Jason Tyndall. We appreciate him coming back on the program to talk Pirate football tonight. And, when you take a look at this Tulane team, and I know we'll talk about this season here in just a few minutes, but, last year nobody would have guessed 2-10.
Yeah, that was a shock, and it just kept, week in and week out, there was something more that kept piling on that left me kind of at a loss for words, and my job is to actually be the opposite of that. But 8 losses in a row in the middle of that season, and the first month of the year, everything on the road and living on the road due to Hurricane Ida, and it was well, to put it mildly, it was a year from hell, and one that it's been probably 17 years since folks in these parts and around Tulane have experienced a football season like that. And the 05 Katrina year where they were playing in different city, different week. And then this one last year in which first home game moved to a road game, next home game moved to a neutral site game. And then you get blown out by Ole Miss. You get a ton of injuries in that game, and suddenly the avalanche starts. And so it was quite a first year for myself. I'll say that. It was a very unexpected and chaotic season. And what's been interesting about this group heading into this year and a week and a half away from kick is that, by and large, they've moved on from what happened last year and the horrible year that it was, but they are still willing to bring it up and talk about it as reasons why that can't happen again. They will discuss it pretty freely about how everything went wrong last year, and it really angers them, and how Willie Fritz has never had a year like that in his time here at Tulane, and these players have not had years like that here. It was a 3-year bowl streak prior to last year, and so they're using it as more fuel than I think people would be surprised at. A year like that, you think you just want to push it away and be done with it. But there are a lot of guys returning from that team, and it's hard to say forget it. And so they're channeling it to say, no, that's not us. Like, that's not what we have been in the last 10 years. And this year we're going to prove it.
Yeah. So when you Corey, when you talk about that, I was there watching the game as a fan, and I was just really taken back by the outcome of that game. But when you start looking at the logistics and what you talk about, the challenges the team faced, it was just an uphill battle all year, and you're really pushing the boulder up the mountain. And you look at the statistics though from ECU in comparison to Tulane from an offensive perspective. Tulane actually ran for 2 more yards per game than ECU, and then ECU had about 50 yards more passing per game. But when you look at the wins and the losses, it's just the opposite effect of what we expect from Tulane, like you said, historically. And when you look at this year, as an honest ECU fan, we look at the trip down to Tulane as it's going to be a battle, and we know that's going to happen, and we realize that last year is more of an anomaly than the trend. So kind of like to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, the game last year in Greenville, that was week 5. That was the conference opener. And we had just lost a really tough game to UAB, a ton of chances to win that game at home. It was our return home to Yeoman Stadium. And there was a good crowd, and everyone was really anxious to just get that game going. And they shot themselves in the foot in that game. And so we walked out of that kind of annoyed at how they played, but still not wildly worried yet about where the team was. That trip to Greenville was the first moment for me that was like an uh-oh, like something's really not right now with this group. And there are really kind of two halves of last year, Jason, and you can see where the split happened just looking at scores from, losses were piling up everywhere, but the way certain games transpired, there's really a line of demarcation. First half of the year, they were putting up points, but defensively, they were about as bad as you could find in the country. And that East Carolina game was really the apex of that, and they gave up touchdowns in the first 4 ECU drives of the day. And when you looked up and there's the start of the second quarter and the game was over. And then right around the bye week, it completely reversed, where the defense completely solidified and was one of the better defensive units in the conference in the last half of the year, but the offense went south. And that, part of that was they were throwing the ball quite a bit more in the first half of the year, but it was getting their quarterback injured. Michael Pratt was injured pretty much head to toe last year, had to miss a Cincinnati game due to a concussion. And so they were forced to reset how they run the offense. And so they tried to keep it more on the ground, but Tajay Spears wasn't fully healthy until about the last 3 weeks of the season. And when he's healthy, he's maybe the best running back in the conference. I know you have 2 there that would probably beg to say otherwise. But he finished last year with 264 yards and a couple of touchdowns at Memphis. He is that much of a difference maker, and now he's back to healthy. It was a mess. It was a mess offensively all year long, and it shouldn't be a ton of surprise that almost the entire offensive coaching staff has changed from last year, to including the man in charge. Jim Sobota is now the offensive coordinator. So getting to how you ended your question, Jason, and we were talking a little bit about this prior to starting the show, the Tulane schedule is kind in non-conference, but in conference play, it's not very welcoming. But there are a handful of games that are swing games in my mind for this Tulane team in order to get back to the postseason. And that Week 6 game against East Carolina is the first one of those, because I think they if last year's team replicates itself, I would be absolutely shell-shocked by it. And so the bludgeoning they took last year in Greenville is going to be prevalent heading into that week. And if they play the way that they should in the first 5 weeks of the year, and they're in, I think 3-2 is possible in the first 5 weeks of the year, maybe 4-1, then that becomes a massive game early on in the schedule for both of these programs who are looking to get back into a bowl game.
So if you look at the all-time record, ECU leads 12-6, but any Pirate fan recognizes the recent success has been on Tulane's side. I think they're 4-2 in the last 6 games against ECU. So this game this year was, I'll be honest, riding down from the Raleigh area to Greenville that day, my buddy and I and our families ride down together. I said, look, they took Oklahoma to the wire first week. They played a tough game against you had a couple of tough games between that point and the ECU game. And I said, look, I don't have any confidence right now that we're going to pull this out. And then that game happens, and now we have to turn around and return the trip back down to New Orleans. And we all know that's going to be a tough trip for our team. And anybody who knows anything about Willie Fritz's past, he's not going to sit back and let things continue to happen that are not going to help his team win. He's a winner. He's been a winner at all levels of college football. So I look at this much like Phil Steele and a lot of other people do, and I'm not in that same level as him, but I'm saying this is a game that's going to be pivotal for both schools, and it's going to be who comes up, who shows up with the big boy pants on as the toughest team that week. So I'm excited about making a trip down there to see you guys and visit and watch the game, but I'm also a little concerned about heading into it. Not trying to look too far ahead in the schedule, but this is not going to be an easy W for ECU by any stretch of the imagination, or Tulane. So it's going to be fun.
Yeah, I would hope it's not viewed that way. I mean, last year's result, I think, would lead folks back in Greenville to think that. And there will be 5 weeks of football heading into that week. And, the week before we're at Houston, and that's a Friday nighter. And so, one, we'll get the extra day heading into that game. But two, it's Houston, who's the preseason conference favorite heading in. And so there will be a very challenging game right before that for this team. And so how they make it out of that Houston game, I think, will say a lot about how they're able to play against East Carolina. Houston will be physical, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And if you can make it out of that game healthy, then you're going to like where you sit when ECU comes to town. It's all on the defensive side when it comes to that matchup, because Ayler's had a day. Keaton Mitchell ran all over this Tulane team last year. And once that game happened, there was a real kind of come to Jesus moment on the defensive side of the ball last year, and they played much better most of the rest of the way. It's the strength of this team and it's been the strength of Willie Fritz's tenure here, especially getting into the backfield and pass rushing and edge rushing. That's been his calling card. And so it's going to need to look a heck of a lot more like a Tulane defense week in and week out, as opposed to the up and down that we saw last year. And if they look like that, if they look like the consistent defense that we are used to seeing from Tulane, then that East Carolina game is going to be a pretty damn good one.
Yeah.
Corey, go ahead, Jason.
No, I was going to say that if it's what I anticipate, the game might last an hour and a half and be.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. I mean, with the ground games that these two teams have and are certainly capable of. I think that thing could keep moving, and I don't think there'd be many people too chagrined by that.
Yeah. Hey, now, Corey, you talk about the offensive staff changes as we really begin to dive into the 2022 Green Wave. Just talk about those staff changes, because this is Michael Pratt's third offensive coordinator in as many seasons, and then we'll start diving into some of the personnel Michael Pratt has around him.
Yeah, Jim Sobota is now the new offensive coordinator. He comes over from Central Missouri, where he's the head man there. He took over for Willie Fritz running that program, and the last 5 years he's led a pretty high-octane offense. And so he's now going to work on transitioning that to FBS football. And, I talked with Michael, a little bit in the spring, then in fall camp, and his comfort level with what is in front of him is impressive. When you talk about what you just mentioned, Bubba, it's his third OC in 3 years, and that is not ideal. One leaves for a head job and one leaves for a different OC job. But the way that he has really taken to this offensive strategy, and just the joy he has running it, and how much fun he's having actually doing this again. There were moments last year in which he really dreaded waking up and going to practice, and he was battered and bruised every week, and he questioned his desire to keep going last year, but he stuck with it. And now there's nobody better in terms of vocally leading this club, and you have a guy that is immensely talented when he's able to be protected. The offensive line really fell apart last year around him. But part of that was the scheme that they were running, and it didn't fit with the personnel that they had, especially up front. So that leads to knee injury and shoulder injury and concussion and everything that Pratt went through last year. Now there's a system in place that is much more suited to what he can do and what his offensive line can do. He's a mobile guy when he is allowed to take off and run. Too much last year, he had to bail out. And so it led to more open field tackles and more opportunities for injury. Now they've reined that in a little bit, and he's trusting the pocket more in camp, and the offensive line is holding for him. When it sees a different jersey, we'll see how that plays out. But the way that Pratt has taken to Jim Sobota and vice versa has been really good to see. And I would imagine there's no man happier about that than Willie Fritz, because he knows the risk of third OC in 3 years for a starting quarterback. But so far, everything has looked really, really smooth between those two. And if they're on the same page, then the dominoes should fall right after that.
And Corey, you made reference just a few minutes ago to the stable of running backs that Tulane has, much like East Carolina, and we'll talk about Keaton Mitchell, Rajay Harris, et cetera, later on, I'm sure. But tell us about those Tulane running backs.
Yeah, Tajay Spears is the guy, and he blew out his ACL third game of the year 2 years ago, and so he missed all that year and then came back to start 2021, but clearly wasn't 100%. You could tell, and so they had to limit what he was capable of doing. About 4 weeks left in the year, he got the thumbs up that he was 100%, and it was like a rocket launching. And he changes the entire complexion of how this Tulane offense operates. When he is toting the rock, there's very little that is in his way. Like, he's capable of pretty much anything you'd want from a running back. He is a stocky guy for the size that he is. His cutting ability is frightening, especially coming off of a serious knee injury. He has what he's heading into camp. He was asked if he had another gear from one of the media, the TV guys here in New Orleans, and he says, I have 2 other gears. And so, and he's also wildly confident about his ability. He's an NFL caliber running back, even for the stature that he is. He's only about 5'10", but he's that good. And then behind him, Cam Carroll is this big bruiser of a back, and he's our Rajay Harris. When you think about, the 2 that ECU has, well, Tulane's got 2 that are very similar to that. And Cam Carroll is that guy. He will ricochet off of contact and really make you hurt if you aren't the low man. He's also a sneaky good receiver out of the backfield, and that's something that I would imagine they'll be utilizing a little bit in the screen game. And then, frankly, Tulane feels they go 4 deep right now in the running back room, and there's a youngster by the name of Mekhi Hughes that's getting a lot of burn here towards the end of camp that they like as well. And so they're running 5 pretty regularly heading into the year. Ashad Clayton transfers in from Colorado, another bigger back, but give him an open space and he'll hit a second gear that they have raved about heading into the year. And then Iverson Celestine, a young guy from right here in New Orleans that showed some flashes last year. They held him to just 4 games, so he redshirted. But they think there's some raw ability there that is groomable, and they've seen a little bit more of a step from him forward so far in fall camp. So they are, I'm not sure they are happier with the position heading into this season than running back right now. And last year they felt good about where they sat running game wise, but they knew they were hampered at the top with Tajay Spears. Now they have him, and they have some scary weapons behind him. Willie Fritz has always loved running the ball. This offense is not going to be solely run. It's going to be more split. But they know that every time they hand the ball off to one of these backs, something good has the potential to happen.
Hey, Corey, with that being the case, it sounds a lot like ECU right now, as you know how we're built, your familiarity with the program. But what does Tulane have as far as the wideouts and the tight end position? Did they have nice complements to go wrong with those 4 or 5 running backs?
Yeah, I mean, the first half of the year, Jason, when this was a kind of a more of a passing game offense, it was the tight ends that were the weapons. Tyreek James and Will Wallace were terrific 1-2 punch as tight end options. When they switched to trying to run the ball, they became more, blockers, and they were taken out of the offensive playbook quite a bit. Wide receiver was a sore spot last year, and most of these guys are returning from last year's club, and that is the position that needs to really elevate itself. There is some really sharp talent on the wide receiver core. Deuce Watts, twin brother Fat Watts, they are dynamic. They couldn't hang on to the football last year. It was that simple. Jaquan Jackson, who is also the punt returner for this team, he is a scary utility knife, but he was hampered by injuries throughout the season last year and had to deal with a lot of things in the aftermath of Hurricane Ida that really just wiped out his season. They brought in a guy last year by the name of Shea Wyatt, who was the more trustworthy receiver that Michael Pratt had, ironically transferred in from Central Missouri, and now his former head coach is his offensive coordinator. And it was 2 years ago, Jim Sobota reached out to Willie Fritz and said, hey, I got a wide receiver who's getting some looks, but you might like him. Would you talk to him? And that was Shea Wyatt. He was the most sure-handed receiver of the bunch last year. 2 new guys that they brought in, 2 transfers that are coming in. Lawrence Keys out of Notre Dame was a real star of camp. And then Day-Day McDougal comes in from Maryland, high school teammates with Michael Pratt. And so he pitched McDougal to come down here. And those 2 have kind of been lockstep ever since he arrived on campus. And so there's a little bit more comfort in one of the wide receivers for Michael Pratt. He knows what McDougal's capable of doing. He ran with him for 6 years. They even played middle school together. And Lawrence Keys is a great blend of being in the right spot and able to get separation. That was such a huge flaw in this wide receiving core last year, Jason. It seemed like nobody could get separated from their defender. You bring in 2 guys that are now capable of doing that. Deuce Watts has bulked up, so he is going to be in one-on-one coverage more often than not, and so he's gotten bigger to try and fight those physical battles going up for jump balls. So to make this a really long answer for you, Jason, the wide receivers are talented and they're there. They need to show it. They're the position group on the offensive side of the ball, aside from the line. I mean, everything starts there. But the wide receivers need to take a jump up in their game. And if they do that, then Tulane's back playing postseason ball.
You mentioned the transfer portal and the guys coming in. Have you guys noticed a trend where there's a lot of talent in that area in Louisiana? You know, if you look at it from an NFL perspective, it's one of the hotbeds in the country. And a lot of people don't realize that. Are you seeing a lot of the Louisiana people who leave and come back to Tulane or the local schools like LSU?
It is a strategy of Willie Fritz and this coaching staff that if they lose the initial recruiting battle for kids locally, that they kind of keep their eyes on them and try to bring them back home if they're not getting opportunities elsewhere. Lawrence Keys is that type of guy. Wasn't getting his shot in Notre Dame. He comes home. There's a guy by the name of Patrick Jenkins on the defensive line, transfers in from TCU. He's a local kid. He wasn't getting time at TCU. There's a big horse of a human that is going to sit right in the middle of this defensive line, maybe be the starting D tackle next weekend. It is a Shad Clayton, another one, local kid, brought him back, the running back from Colorado. It is a point of focus for Willie Fritz. For all the issues last year, they only lost one major piece of that puzzle to the transfer portal. That was their nose tackle and Jeffrey Johnson. He went to Oklahoma, which is not a bad level up. They did not lose anybody from their recruiting class last year. And the transfers that they were bringing in all stayed, including Lawrence Keys, despite the fact that, you know, part of the pitch to him was that he would play for an offensive coordinator that he was around before, Chip Long, who was at Notre Dame and then came down to Tulane. Now he's at Georgia Tech, and Lawrence Keys still came down to Tulane instead. It is very important for Willie Fritz and this staff, now entering year 7 for Coach Fritz, to make sure that the Tulane flag is planted in this city and in southeastern Louisiana football. You know, they've done a good job of that even prior to Willie Fritz, but it's been lifted since he got here. The requirements to get into this school are challenging, and that very much goes for student athletes as well. So I think people do lose sight of the job that Coach Fritz does recruiting here in this area And if he doesn't get them first, he gets them again. And so that creates, the Louisiana football that is so rich here in this town. That flavor is deeper on this roster than people would probably be led to believe with the type of requirements and admissions and the cost of going to the school.
Now, Corey, go ahead, Jason. Sorry, we had some feedback there. I thought you were chiming in, Jason. But earlier, Corey, you were talking about the struggles of the defense a year ago. Talk about Chris Hampton's unit this time around. He's someone that has a long association with the program, and he had gone to Duke in 2020, and now it's his second season back. Talk about some of those key contributors the Green Wave have returning, or guys that are coming in that expect to make an immediate impact.
Well, it's going to be the front four dictates a lot of a Willie Fritz defense, and it took 6 weeks for that to be sorted out last year. And then Darius Hodges came into his own and became the conference's best TFL guy with 15.5 last year. He's on one edge, and there's a couple of guys returning from injury that are behind him that they're very high on, and Devin Deal and Carlos Hatcher. But the linebacking core of this team was the strength last year and had the top, as you might presume, the top tacklers of the team were your linebackers. And those two guys are back again this year. Nick Anderson is insane with where he's always in the right spot. And it's he shoots through gaps with ease. That he's on the smaller end in terms of a linebacker, but boy, when he hits, it's hit and he doesn't miss. And then he's got Dorian Williams on the other side of him. That is the bigger, the more prototypical sized linebacker that is ferocious. Those two are frightening. And if their ability to punch into the backfield is close to unparalleled in this league. Those two behind the front four, which has a little bit of shifting in it in the middle of the line. The middle of the line is, we just mentioned Jeffrey Johnson transferred. And so there are a little bit of question in the middle of this defensive line, but with Anderson and Williams back there, they're going to soak up a lot that might get through that first level. The question I would say is the secondary. There's some talent there, but it's not as deep as in years past. Jaden Kennedy really broke on the scene as a nickelback last year, true freshman out of Jacksonville. He's probably sliding to corner heading into this year. Macon Clark was a free safety. He looks like he's going to be kind of a nickelback heading into this year. Lance Robinson, who had an up and down year and injury plagued last year, he's taken over at the other corner. He transfers in from Kansas State. You got a transfer from Duke and Lummy Young. He's going to be probably your starting free safety. And then Larry Brooks has been around this will be his 5th year. He's going to be your strong safety. Behind that group, that seems to be the 5 that are set back there and how this in the 4-2-5 defense that Willie Fritz plays. Behind that is some inexperience. And so that's going to be the question for Chris Hampton, secondary's guy, as you just alluded to, Bubba, and figuring out here pretty quick. Because what burned Tulane last year in the first half of the year defensively was just getting absolutely filleted over the top. And once the bye week hit, that defense looked radically different. And it was in large part because that secondary was staying on their mans, not biting on routes, and being in the right spot. It can't take 6 weeks for that to come back into the picture this year as it did last year, because you got some games to start where you could theoretically, hopefully, figure some things out and still walk out with wins. But once week 3 comes and then you get into conference play after that, those gimmies are gone. The gimmies that you see on the schedule, you say that should be a victory. Those go away in very short order. So that the secondary needs to be as sure-footed as it was to end last year to start this year, because it was a mess to begin 2021.
Corey, tell us about that third phase of the game, the special teams.
Questions. The place kicker, the field goal kicker, Merrick Glover, is gone, a sixth-year senior who became Tulane's all-time leading scorer last year, but he was injured for most of the year, and frankly, Merrick's forte was short distance. He was not really that trustworthy from really about 35 yards out, and so Tulane had to go for a lot of fourth downs last year. That and they were trailing a lot, so it really forced their hand. There is a competition for that spot now. Graham Dable, lefty kicker from the Chicago area. The transfer comes in from Rutgers, Valentino Ambrosio, who has made some pretty important kicks last year in Rutgers, for Rutgers. And then a kid by the name of Kriston Esnard, Georgia is where he's from. He's got a leg. I mean, it sounds different coming off his foot. And what's been really good to see, he had trouble with accuracy last year, even in practice, and that has changed this year. He has been far more accurate. He drilled a 50-yarder in the last scrimmage on Saturday, and that's something that, in the last 4 years, he really couldn't have dreamt that Tulane would even try. And now we'll see if he's going to be the guy. They might try for some of those long field goals. It's been a huge point of emphasis for Willie Fritz heading into this year, where you got to make the gimmies, but you also need to have the ability to try long ones and be somewhat successful at those. And that has not been part of Tulane's forte and special teams really since he got here. There's a new special teams coordinator. Robbie Disher comes in from Georgia to help lead this unit. And so we'll see. This is still a battle. It's up for grabs a week and a half before the season starts. Ryan Wright was the punter last year. He was, frankly, this team's MVP, and now he's on the Minnesota Vikings. And so it speaks to what the year was if you're talking about your punter as the MVP, but he was that good. Ray Guy semifinalist. Casey Glover is probably taking over at that position now, and the kickoff guy. That's Merrick's younger brother, who was kickoff last year. Now he'll do kickoff and punt. And he is a wizard kicking off. This team had to recover a bunch of onside kicks last year, and they recovered 4 with him doing them. He is stellar in that mode. Punting, we haven't seen as much of yet, so we'll see how he transitions into that. But special teams, aside from the offensive line, which we kind of jumped over a little bit, which frankly there are about 9 guys battling there. The special teams position battles were the fiercest in camp, and there's one that's still waging. So that's going to be, there were too many moments last year in which you needed a field goal and you couldn't get it. And now that needs to change.
Hey, Corey, I have one homework question for you.
Yeah.
You obviously have a lot of familiarity with both ECU and Tulane now. How similar is it covering Tulane athletics to ECU, and how similar are the schools actually in as far as fan bases and just the atmosphere outside of the locations?
I'm not sure they could be more different, honestly. I mean, the biggest difference for me is that I'm working with 3 sports now instead of 1. And so, in case of point today, like I was on campus for a little bit. I was getting things set up in my radio booth at Yeoman. I was, talking to some of the football players, but then 2 baseball players walked up and I started talking to them. And then I saw one of our basketball players before I left. And so it's, I'm around more programs. And so I've made more connections and more relationships with the folks here at Tulane than I ever was really able to do at East Carolina. Where I was just only with baseball, and then I would drop in for a basketball game here or there. In terms of fan bases, I mean, the schools are wildly different. This is a private institution of 13,000 students. Most of them are not from this city. Most are not from this state. It is heavy Northeast population, a huge international student population. that costs $80,000 a year. But the benefit out of all that is that a Tulane degree is very coveted. And so, the campus itself is on 3-4 blocks as opposed to East Carolina's, which is sprawled all over the place. ECU's public school, a lot of in-state residents are going there. The environments, I can't really give you a great answer in terms of football because we really didn't have the chance to have a bunch of those last year. Homecoming was a great environment last year, but it was in the midst of a really awful season. And so there was, 12,000 people in a stadium that seats 30, and, you could tell. So, East Carolina is what I've found now that I get to see this entire league across 3 sports and travel, go to, basketball arenas and, go to Wichita and all that stuff, and Temple and, all these basketball hotbeds, and then going to the, various football stadiums that I've been to, like UCF in Memphis last year. ECU's fan base is probably the most passionate you'll come across in this league as it currently sits, the American. There are some very passionate, dedicated Tulane fans. A lot of them are not here in this city. A lot of people transplant out when they get their degrees and they move on elsewhere. Those that are here, and I've interacted with a good number of them, they love this place. And there is a very large kind of chip on the shoulder of fans here, where Tulane doesn't always get the main focus media wise, and it's, we're battling with the Saints and we're competing with LSU and the Pelicans for airtime, and so it's a badge of honor to walk around with Tulane gear on in this city and show the people of this town and the tourists that are in this town that you're proud of the school that you went to and work for. So it's the commonality between the 2 fan bases is that they're very protective of their school, and they will take that to the grave. The size of crowds, we didn't get great crowds last year. We went 2-10 and we lost 2 home games due to a hurricane. Basketball arena was crazy last year because of how entertaining they were. Baseball had a very strange year, and so the crowds really dissipated throughout all of that. So, ECU, I was lucky to be in, certainly one of those venues with some raucous crowds. And, been lucky to be in one of the venues here at Tulane with some pretty raucous crowds at all. I'm looking forward to more.
Corey, kind of along those lines, since you referenced the home schedule a season ago, some people may have forgotten that game against Oklahoma was originally supposed to be there at Ullman Stadium. So talk about, is that still going to happen, hopefully?
Well, the last word we got was, frankly, when the statement came out, when they announced the game shift last year, it was, I think, the Monday of that game week that it was announced we were going to Norman, that they would work with Tulane on getting a trip to New Orleans back on the schedule. I don't know if there is anything contractual in place about that. That is above my head. I know there is another trip to Oklahoma in the coming years for Tulane. I believe it's in not next season, but the season after. I believe there's another trip to Norman that's supposed to be coming. So I don't know. I hope it does actually come to fruition with the wildly changing landscape of college athletics, and particularly college football, and Oklahoma's part in that here. I would need to see it in writing before I, say, yeah, get your tickets now. Like, you never know. I certainly hope that is in the cards, because this place was going to be rocking that day. And if that game were played here in New Orleans as opposed to in Norman, Tulane wins that game. Like, it's not even a question with how they played last year in that meeting. So, I hope Ole Miss is going to come in next year to return that trip that we made last year. And so hopefully, even as things explode in terms of college conference realignment again, that those matchups are still on the docket for schools like Tulane, for schools like East Carolina, because they're a heck of a lot of fun.
Yeah, hats off to the Tulane AD on making that happen. Getting Oklahoma and Ole Miss to come to Ullman Stadium, that's big time. And you read my mind there. I was going to ask you, in addition to Oklahoma, what other intriguing non-conference games and did the Tulane Green Wave have in New Orleans in coming seasons?
Well, I believe we had a game with Mississippi State on the schedule, but I think that's dropped off now. I know Duke is going to be in town in a couple of years. I believe I don't want to speak out of turn on that one. Maybe Northwestern comes in as well at some point. Kansas State will come back to us here. We go to them this year. And so at some point, Kansas State's coming back our way. But that's all I got. That's all I can think of right now in terms of like those types of matchups. Regionally, the fact that Southern Miss is back on our schedule is big for our fans, and I think for Southern Miss fans as well. ECU had their fair share of moments with Southern Miss as well in the past, and so to keep that series going is important for our fan base, because there's just enough history between those two where it's not the big name, but that's going to be a great crowd in week 4. And so, stuff like that, where I hope more of that keeps happening too, where, people are jumping all over the place in terms of conferences, and kids in Los Angeles are going to go to Penn State to play sports here in a couple of years. And I hope when the dust settles that, the schools that are left out realize the benefit of the regionality of this world and college sports. And so, having Southern Miss be on our schedule, making that a semi-regular thing. We'll go there in a couple of years. And, we have Louisiana, I think, is back on our schedule in the not too distant future, and making that trip. And so it's stuff like that hopefully when the time comes for cooler heads to prevail here, that becomes a common element of college football, certainly.
And not to go too far down that conference realignment rabbit hole, but since you bring up playing Southern Miss, that's one thing. Some East Carolina fans snicker about it, and they're like, and just kind of turn up their nose, but at the same time, like, yes, now there's no doubt that East Carolina is doing the right thing, staying in the American, $7 million a year versus $2 million a year in the Sun Belt. But that regionality factor that you're talking about, with Southern Miss, Louisiana Lafayette, and those other programs within the Sun Belt Conference, it's going to be interesting to see, how that league continues to grow, because the moves they've made and the improvement on the field they've made, with the App States, the Georgia Southerns, et cetera, Louisiana, they've really elevated that conference, and they're. People laugh at $2 million, but compared to what they were getting, it's a big step, and it'll be interesting to see how much it grows.
Well, and it's probably one of 2 leagues right now, and I'm saying this as someone who works within the American, but it's one of 2 leagues that I can think of that I think is still holding on to what made so many of us fall in love with college sports, and that is the weird, very personal, regional elements of playing games. And, it's the Sun Belt. Frankly, I love what they did in their realignment pushing here. And now that league, we're talking football, but that league in baseball is incredible. And then the Mid-American is the only other one that is kind of still staying put with what they do, and it's small towns and bus trips, and I'm speaking as a MAC alum from Northern Illinois who still hates Toledo with all my might, and it's just stuff like that is so ingrained in college sports that when UCLA is playing Maryland, like, this is not going to be there. And when Oklahoma is playing Vanderbilt, like, it just, that's not going to be in there. And so it's, I hope, the American is going to take a wild shift here again. This time next year, it's going to be crazy different when we do this chat again. And, I think the one benefit of what's changed about the American, or will change, is that the amount of schools in Texas that are going to be part of this league. And so maybe they can get that back a little bit, that regionality back. And we're close here, selfishly, to a lot of the schools are being added. Adding UAB to our, to us here at Tulane is going to be a real nice benefit. I think we can start something pretty good with UAB. And, you guys having Charlotte on the schedule, there's something that can be started there. But I hope that's where people take a breath and get back to when it comes to college sports. Whatever happens in the SEC and the Big Ten is going to happen, and maybe schools get moved up, and maybe Tulane moves up, or maybe ECU moves up. But if it doesn't happen, get back to what made people love these schools to start, and being a part of the crowds, and ECU playing. Goodness, who's the rival of ECU right now? It's like
that's the thing. Yeah.
Finding one. Charlotte, get Charlotte back on the schedule. Try and schedule someone with Coastal yearly. It's just something like that. Old Dominion. It's just, and for us, Southern Miss, Louisiana Tech, Monroe, all the, USA is right nearby, and Troy, and all these schools. And so, hopefully it eventually reaches that point. We're not going to be there for a while, though.
Corey, you say that, and a point that a lot of ECU fans probably will not be a fan of mine after I say this, but outside of the outcome of the game last year, we played them a year early in relationship to our roster age compared to theirs, but we opened it with App State in Charlotte.
Yeah.
And outside of the game, granted, that's what we went for. We went to win, and we were all disappointed. But that atmosphere was electric on a Thursday night. A Thursday night. You can imagine if it was a Saturday afternoon in Bank of America Stadium, or in Greenville, or in Kidd Brewer. And that's something that's special about college athletics. We, like you said, take a deep breath, step back, and realize that there's something to an App State, a Southern Miss, a Marshall, and then sprinkle in the occasional bye games, et cetera, that are going to probably be more difficult to get based on what the SEC are saying they're going to be doing with their schedule. But it brings back my neighbor who lives beside me, who went to this other school. We're going to go to the game together. We're going to talk a little smack beforehand, have a good time, enjoy the game. And it's actually means something, as opposed to some directional school who's a 19-hour bus ride away. It's a different feeling.
Our homecoming game this year is against Memphis, and, Tulane and Memphis have had their moments in their histories. And so there'll be some fire in there, and homecoming will automatically probably bring the largest crowd of the year. But I can promise you that if it's not going to be that game that has the biggest amount of fans in our stadium, it's going to be Southern Miss. That matchup is rooted for decades in this school's lore. And so, Southern Miss is 2 hours from here. The amount of people they'll bring will be huge, and that will force the hand of Tulane fans to, when they're looking at the 7 home games, which games do we want to go to? Oh, well, Southern Miss. Remember this one when we went up there and we beat them. Tulane went up there 3 years ago and won. Our offensive coordinator's coming back. Will Hall was the offensive coordinator 3 years ago. Now he's the head coach there. And it's you remember the 80s, you remember the 1998 season, all that stuff. That's going to be the biggest draw of the whole year. We don't get Houston at home. We don't get Cincinnati at home. We don't have a Power 5 team at home this year. But there are some big time names for the history of this school and what certain matchups have been in the past that are going to be here. And that's going to be what brings people out. That and winning, getting back to winning ways here is going to bring people out. But just keeping that hook into the past of this sport is so vital to me. And this schedule at least has bits and pieces of that here for Tulane. That's great to see.
Hey, now, guys, right now I'd like to welcome in co-host Kyle Barber. And Kyle, obviously this is a topic on conference reaffiliation, that is, and
Hold on,
or
Bubba.
realignment, rather.
I have not talked to Kyle, I think, since I moved down here. Kyle Barber, buddy, how you been?
Corey, that's a loaded question, my friend.
Yeah.
I've been much better. But we'll talk about that later. Conference realignment, conference reaffiliation. Yeah, coming in tail in on the discussion here. I don't know how long you guys have been discussing it. I really like what the Sun Belt's done. If we're really looking at it, I think they made some really smart moves. You have two divisions now in the Sun Belt that make a lot of geographical sense, and there's a lot of potential rivalries there with, App State and Marshall, JMU and Marshall, ODU and James Madison, Georgia State, Georgia Southern, Southern Miss, South Alabama. There's a lot of stuff there that makes a lot of sense. What the Americans done, I think there was too much focus on markets. I do think there are some additions to me that made some sense. I like bringing in UTSA. I think if you're going to look at a market and say that this really does make sense. San Antonio is a big city that doesn't have any pro sport teams outside of the Spurs. They've kind of treated UTSA almost like an expansion pro sports team. When they're winning, they really get behind them, even in Conference USA. So, they had a top 25 program last year. I really like the upside for UTSA. I think that was a really smart ad. Charlotte, yeah, I think there's some potential there in basketball and baseball for rivalry with East Carolina. But, we don't want a football rivalry with Charlotte. I'd have much rather seen the American at App State. And I know you can talk the Charlotte media market all you want. I can tell you right now, Appalachia State and Bubba lives in the area. App State has a bigger footprint in the Charlotte area than the 49ers does. So I'd have really loved to see App State brought in instead of Charlotte. But it is what it is. UAB, program on the rise. You hate to see their coach retire when he did. Really bad timing. I know he's having some bad problems. I believe it's with his back or neck. So thankfully nothing life-threatening. But, he's done a hell of a job establishing that program after it was suspended football. They got a nice new stadium. I question how many people in Birmingham or Alabama in general care about UAB football. But,
more than you think. More than you think. As someone who lived there for a month last year, more people than you'd realize love that program.
Well, they need to show up on Saturday then, because you don't see them in the stands. And there's some potential there with Tulane. UAB and Memphis have some history there with a rivalry, so that'll be brought back into fruition. A school that really interests me right now is SMU. What they're doing with NIL is head and shoulders above anybody else I've seen in the American or the Group of Five. It's going to be interesting to see how long they stay, so-called Group of Five, with the kind of NIL deals they're putting together for football, and how much it's going to put them over time. You would think, you're not supposed to entice with NIL, but that's what it does. The high school players know what the guys are getting now. They know they'll get the same thing when they come in. I believe every SMU football player is getting $25,000, something like that. So I think SMU is going to be an interesting one to watch to see how they rise with their NIL deal in the American. And, if the Pac-12 does lose more teams, if the Big 12 takes from the Pac-12, I think SMU is probably sitting in a pretty good place to be the next school up and into a power league.
I think I saw the collective that SMU has going, and we have one here too. I think pretty much everyone does by this point, of NIL collective. The reason why SMU and Memphis were left out of the mix this time last year is because their facilities aren't there yet. So that's the biggest key to me, and it's no surprise that Memphis has just recently released renovation plans for the Liberty Bowl. And it's no surprise why South Florida has now released plans for an on-campus stadium. And SMU has announced that they're fundraising for renovations. Like that's, the success of Cincinnati and Houston and UCF got them the bump to the Big 12, but also the investment that they put into their athletics campus got them there as well. And so, they're raising a ton of money for NIL, and that will help them out in the long run, and help them get recruits and keep people around instead of transferring. The Conference Player of the Year in basketball transferred out of SMU and went to Memphis last year, Kendrick Davis. And so this is going, and that collective you mentioned, Kyle, also goes to basketball players. And so this is going to help in that regard. But Ford Field and Moody Coliseum need work. And so when that happens, then you are going to start probably seeing a mighty push from them to get into a higher league. The 6 schools that were added by the American were added for a couple of reasons. One, the markets, as you alluded to, Kyle, and most of them are in big markets again. 2, the investment they put in their athletics facilities is why they got the bump up. Like Rice has put in a ton, North Texas has put in a ton. I think a lot of us have seen the Charlotte campus and what they've done. Florida Atlantic has done that as well. UAB just opened a new stadium. That's the common thread between that 6. That and they weren't in the Sun Belt to start. They're all Conference USA, and the American, their media partner, said don't go after any Sun Belt schools because they're also a media partner of ours. So there's the 3-pronged approach as to the teams that got added to the American. It's the NIL gets the focus, and rightly so here over the last year, but the schools that invest in their facilities are the ones that are getting jumps. And so that's what will be telling over the next 5 years, is if the Liberty Bowl plans come to fruition, if the Ford Field plans come to fruition, if USF builds their on-campus stadium, that's going to get the ball rolling too. But if more happens, for them to maybe get a call.
You mentioned Rice with their huge stadium that nobody goes to. Have they done anything? What are their plans? You mentioned Rice facility upgrades. They need to build a small 25 to 30,000 seat on campus stadium, because that huge Cameras Rice Bowl or whatever it's called is big, it's old, it's ugly, and nobody goes to it.
The problem they have with that is made up for with the fact that they have an indoor practice facility and brand new athletics buildings around it. And so that's helped them push them into joining our league next year. So yeah, and they have done some renovation work in that stadium. It's still the massive 80,000 seat bowl that it is. But they have done work in there to try and make it more appealing for fans to come out. But they have done a lot of work around that stadium.
Yeah, and the North Texas ad, and I know they built a new stadium. Oh my God, it's probably been close to 10 years ago now that they built the new stadium down there in Denton, Texas. But the North Texas ad is one that was weird to me. It's almost like Oresco is forecasting SMU leaving. We have the Dallas market, so to me, adding North Texas was a head scratcher of all of them. I think that again. Almost alludes to the fact that he thinks we will lose SMU at some point. Otherwise, why are we going after a market we already have?
Yeah, that's the one that was kind of a head scratcher to me as well. I've not been to Denton. I imagine at some point next year I'll go, just based on my job. But if there was a school of the 6 that I would like to have swapped out, it probably would have been that one and Old Dominion coming in. Like Old Dominion, but the reason why Old Dominion didn't get a call to this league is because their facilities are not good. And it shouldn't be a surprise that, 2 years ago when they hosted a baseball regional, but they hosted it in South Carolina, suddenly fundraising started to come to change their facilities. It wasn't enough and in time to get them involved here. But that's a great market and a huge recruiting area. That I think fits the mold of the American pretty well, with the exception of the fact that they have not been as eager to invest in their athletics campus as the other schools that are adding into the American have.
Yeah, I would have liked to have seen ODU instead of Charlotte. I like, you mentioned ODU's facilities. They do have a nice football stadium that was just built a few years ago. They got a nice basketball arena. I think the problem is their practice facilities and their baseball stadium. I don't know about their other Olympic sports stadiums, but I think that, yeah, you're right. They need to invest in the practice facilities and obviously a baseball stadium. When you're in position to host a regional and you have to do it on the road in Columbia, that's bad.
Hey guys, very quickly, shifting gears, we appreciate you being so generous with your time tonight, Corey. But final thing I wanted to bring up before we let you go, obviously the league's media days were media day was a few weeks ago now. But what were some of your major takeaways, and what are you thinking about this conference as a whole as we head into 2022?
I think it's fascinating that Cincinnati got the most first place votes of any team and finished second. Like that's almost impossible to pull off. Because Houston was picked to win the league, and Cincinnati got 3 more first place votes than Houston did, and then UCF finished third. I vote in that poll. I picked Cincinnati 1 and Houston 2, but it was very, very close because Cincinnati is not as bulletproof as they were last year. There are questions abound about who is quarterbacking, who is in their secondary, and Houston doesn't have those questions. And so, like, I have no problem with how it shook out in the poll. I just found it fascinating how it got to that point, that people still voted Cincinnati to win the league like I did, and they somehow finished second behind Houston. UCF is fascinating to me. We host them here this year. They just announced that John Royce Plumlee, the transfer from Ole Miss, is going to be their starting quarterback, and they just got the transfer quarterback from South Florida, Timmy McClain, just signed on last Friday. And he's scary good if he, doesn't turn the ball over, and we turned him over a bunch. And so the fact that he transferred out of South Florida quick, right before the season and wound up at UCF, that's very intriguing to me. So if Plumlee, who was a quarterback at Ole Miss and then shifted a wide receiver, struggles at all, then you have a very capable number 2 in Mikey Keene, who was the starting quarterback for all last year. And now you bring in Timmy McClain. And with Gus Malzahn now getting a year under his belt with that personnel, it's hard not to like them. And then behind that, I think you got a mishmash of about 4 or 5 programs that will be jockeying for playoff spots or postseason spots. SMU with a new coach, but with Tanner Mordecai still there, is going to be, I think, a wild card in all of this because they were great. And then the second rumor started about Sonny Dykes leaving for TCU, they fell off the earth. And so now are they stable, or is it first-year coach still figuring out what he has? There was a lot of heat on Ryan Silverfield in Memphis last year, and kind of wrongly so. Now it's his 3rd year, and 6-6 is not going to work for Memphis anymore this year. So they need to take a step up. And then there's you guys. It's all there at East Carolina to take a level up here. I don't think there's a conference contender in Greenville, but there certainly is a team that will put scares into the conference contenders. It's offensively you're set. Defensively, lose a couple of pieces, but some more stability there. It wasn't like the floodgates open there. So I think, and then, yes, I am, looking at this through olive and blue glasses, but Tulane has the makeup to be in that mix in the middle of this league again. And it's, you just got to put it onto the field and make it happen. Because last year was horrific, and there can't be another year like that here, and everyone here knows it. 4 swing games on our schedule. East Carolina is the first one. We go to Tulsa, and that has been a thorn in our side over the last couple of years, and that's another team just sitting in the middle of this league that's not great but not bad, and just kind of they're going to pluck a win here or there that kind of catches your eye. We host Memphis, we host SMU. Those are kind of the games on the schedule I see here at Tulane that you can pull out of that with a winning record. You're going to be playing bowl football somewhere, and that's going to be needed for this group and for these fans.
Yeah, you mentioned the conference overall, and just to hit on East Carolina and Tulane, I think we're vastly underrated. I think if you look at our score, or not our score, if you look at the game against Houston, if you look at the game against UCF last year, not only could we have won, we should have beaten UCF, and we took Houston into overtime. I don't think there will be a more physical football team. I don't know if they're besides Cincinnati than East Carolina. That doesn't necessarily mean, we're going to win any more than 7 games like we did last year. But in terms of physicality, I don't think anybody will be more physical than us besides the Bearcats. The Green Wave, I think, will be improved this year. What I don't like about our schedule is what I do like about Tulane's. East Carolina opens with the first 4 at home, and then we play 2 straight road games at South Florida, at Tulane, after 4 straight at home. I think one of those 2 get us, either South Florida or Tulane. I think after playing 4 straight at home, playing 2 straight on the road is tough. So I don't like that. I think either the Wave or the Bulls will get the Pirates in what I will consider an upset this year.
Well, and we were talking about this before you jumped on, Kyle, but the ECU game here, that is the week after we go to Houston, and that is a Friday night game in Houston. So we do get an extra day, but it's also talking about 2 of the more physical teams in the league back-to-back to open up conference play. And so you can make it through Houston healthy, win or loss aside, make it through that and still feel good about the number of bodies that you have. Then that home game with ECU is critical for what the end of the year could look like, and I think far more gettable. So it's the first major game on the schedule for Tulane this year is week 3 at Kansas State, and that's another physical team. And then the back-to-back of Houston and ECU is going to test, I think, the physical endurance of this club. And if they can split those 2, then they're going to like where they sit, I think, come end of November.
Yeah, I think Danner Holgerson's one of the most overrated coaches in college football. Quite honestly, I'd put a cool $1,000 on Houston not winning the American. Somebody else will. Holgerson's overrated.
Kyle, I'll match you on that, buddy. We'll go $2,000 between of us.
You're gonna match it? All right, cool.
Oh yeah, let's do it.
And schools like East Carolina kept him from feeding his players when he was at West Virginia.
East Carolina and Marshall. It was a damn shame.
Yeah. Well, Corey, really appreciate you spending a little over an hour with us tonight, and we'll certainly have you back on there, I guess, early October when the Pirates roll down to New Orleans.
Oh, I suppose. I mean, I thought we were previewing the game now, but I'll join you boys again. I like it. I like the sports objective.
Be a much more brief visit with it being game week, but if your time allows, we'll have you on.
I've never had a brief visit on this show.
Yeah.
Ever. Some of those extra innings, the Sunday night shows would go like an hour 45.
Yeah.
Corey, I gotta ask you when you saw East Carolina in Game 2 of the Supers against Texas, and it looked like in the 7th inning that we were going to do it. Was there part of you that was a little bit jealous that you weren't there calling it, and then you were like, "Well, maybe I didn't miss anything after all"?
It's all right. Here, in all honesty, I wasn't watching that game because I was too nervous. I was the desk that this computer is on. I was building that, and I wasn't even paying attention to the game. I would occasionally, open Twitter, and I would, see what Igo was tweeting about, see what the ECU baseball account was tweeting about, and see where the score was, and then I'd move on. And it wasn't until my phone started, I got a couple of notifications of a couple of Pirate fans mentioning me and saying that it would have been great if I were there for that moment, that I turned Scooter on. I wasn't going to watch, so I turned Scooter on the Varsity Network app.
You son of a bitch! You're the reason.
And that's when it all fell apart.
Turn it on. Well, now we know.
And I've talked to Scooter about this too. And I was like, so and I said like, and it was, I won't lie, there was a bit of a mental tug of war because I still care a ton for that program. And, you know, seeing them in New Orleans when they were here at the end of April, and then we stayed in the same hotel in Clearwater for that whole week, and just interacting with them, talking with them, all that stuff. Like I love those guys, and I'm forever indebted to that program for allowing me to be as big of a part of their world as they let me. And so I wanted them to do it badly. I wanted them to see that through, and there was going to be no better opportunity than this year. And on the other side, like my parents and my boss here, even asked if I was going to go to Greenville for the Supers. And I said no, because, and they were shocked by that. And I said, I'd want to be calling it. Like it wouldn't feel right to me. Like I didn't want to be, I didn't want to show up in Greenville and just, even if I was hanging out in the jungle, like be kind of standing over Scooter's shoulder, who earned that moment to have that chance. And I wanted to call that. Like I would have wanted to call that so bad. And so I said, no, I wasn't going to go up and do that or hang out. I saw the former pitching coach, Jason Dietrich, was there. But no, I mean, so yeah, there was a little bit of a maybe a professional desire there. But I mean, that's the nature of this beast. Like it's, I was absolutely gutted for them. And what shocked me about it was, you know, the game 2 loss was one thing. I did not think game 3 was going to look anything like that. I just didn't think, from what I saw from that team, both in New Orleans, in Clearwater, and the times I would be tuning in throughout the year, I didn't think that was in them. If you understand what that means, I didn't think that team had an uncanny knack of set it, forget it, here's the next job. And so the third game, even with, you know, to be 4-0 down, then a rain delay hits like that, I didn't think that was in that group. I really didn't. And so like it hurt. Like I was in Greenville in July, and I actually ran into a couple of those players. I was out golfing at Ironwood, and there were a couple out there in the driving range. And like, it's, you know, that group was really special to me. And I really thought that was going to be the one. I really did. And so game 2 was hard to listen to. And then game 3 was really surprising.
Yeah, out of gas, out of pitching, and quite frankly, that game shouldn't have been played till Monday. There was storms all around us when they started it in the first, and then get down 4 runs and you don't restart it till 10 o'clock Eastern. That game should have never been played till Monday, but it is what it is.
Yeah, Cliff and David Pierce, neither one of them wanted to start the game, I don't believe, and and that was their hand was forced, by the NCAA and television.
Well, because frankly, it didn't seem like either one of those teams had pitching on that day. Like that was the discussion about Texas, right? Was that they had a great 1-2, but 3 was questionable. So if you get 1 or 2, then you're like where you sit. And Tulane or East Carolina got the Friday, and then had Saturday, and then just let it go. And so that Sunday was nobody really has any pitching. And then, but I didn't think, you know, that reminded me a lot of my first year calling games in 2016 in Lubbock. Like that's what that felt like to me. And I didn't think, you know, that 2016 team was way ahead of schedule and being that close to Omaha. This one got there in a pretty confounding way. You know, I've seen probably more talented East Carolina teams in my 6 years there, but I've never seen a team that just was as relentless as that one was this season. And so to see that response after game 2, that's what That's what I took away from it. That's what I kind of lingered with me, was just the pure whoa in that last day. But as Kyle said, I mean, it is what it is. It's very unfortunate, and there will always be rain in Greenville in June. Like, it just, you can write it in Sharpie, and there it was in the last day of the Super Regional.
Yeah, tip of the hat to the young man from Texas whose name escapes me, but we had hammered him on I guess Friday or Saturday, and then he pitched one of his better games all season in that game 3. But Corey, before we let you get out of here, go ahead and plug your social media and where folks can listen.
Let's see, my social media on Twitter at Corey Gloor, and I tweet a lot of Tulane stuff. And then you can, I do one of these very things called podcasts each week here at Tulane, and you can find that on all your various podcast platforms. It's called The Current. And you can, starting next week, you'll hear from Coach Willie Fritz each and every week. And so heading into that matchup with East Carolina, make sure you give that a listen to see what Coach Fritz thinks about the Pirates heading into that one. And then let's see, we'll be on the air, I guess 5 o'clock Central, 6 o'clock Eastern time on Saturday, September 3rd, for Tulane and UMass to open the year here in New Orleans. And for all you in the greater Greenville region or North Carolina, the Varsity Network app or the Tulane Athletics app, each and every one of our games, football, men's basketball, women's basketball, and baseball, are all broadcast there. So if you feel like after ECU and NC State dabbling in a little Tulane and UMass, open up your phone, find the Varsity Network, and find your old pal Corey.
Really appreciate it as always, and we'll catch up with you here, I guess, a couple months down the road, a month and a half.
Boys, Sports Objective, it is always a pleasure. Jason, great to have you aboard for this nonsense whenever I'm on this show. Say hello to Dave for me, and take care of yourselves here, boys. We'll be talking.
Yep, that's Corey's way of saying he loves us. But no, guys, as you take a look at things, here we are, a week and a half out. It's hard to believe, for part of the year, after the season ended the way it did with not being able to play that bowl game up at the Military Bowl in Annapolis against Boston College. Things were moving kind of slow, but once the summer hit, man, it seems as though, to me, things have really gone quickly.
I wish I could concur, Bubba, but this has been the longest month of my life, so cannot concur. But I'm glad to have football started. It's going to be nice to have a distraction. Pirates and the Wolfpack, a little over a week away. Week 0 this week, guys. Do we want to touch on any of the games this weekend?
Yeah, I think, honestly, Kyle, I think you've probably looked at it more than we have. But there's roughly about 15 games that are being played. What are some that you wanted to hit on?
Well, you got 2 future conference mates going head-to-head or this coming weekend with Charlotte and Florida Atlantic. That game had to be moved up to week 0 because of Conference USA having to adjust their schedule because of the schools leaving for the Sun Belt. So you got week 0 Charlotte and Florida Atlantic in Boca Raton. I think that'll be an interesting game. I believe FAU is about a 6-point favorite, so that'll be a good one. You got a Big Ten matchup. God, who is that, guys? Is it Nebraska, Northwestern?
In Ireland.
That is correct. Nebraska is a 13-point favorite against Northwestern, and that game is taking place, over in Dublin, Ireland?
In Ireland, yeah, so that'll be a good one. Vanderbilt and Hawaii. That should be an interesting game. Vandy wasn't very good last year. Hawaii, this is going to be second year for Todd Graham in Hawaii. I think that'll be an interesting game. There's a few more. My brain, UTEP in North Texas. I say another American school coming in with North Texas, taking on the UTEP Miners. I believe that's in El Paso, or is it in Denton? It's in one or the other. It's an interesting game. What else? Do either one of you have the schedule in front of you? I'm going off memory.
I do. I was scrolling through the schedule on my phone, and I'll tell you, this is a game that most people probably wouldn't give it a second look unless you were affiliated with one of these programs. and you'll understand why when I mention it. But I think you'll agree with where I'm coming from on this. Jim Moore Jr., his era is beginning up at UConn, and they're taking on Utah State, who was tremendous a season ago under Blake Anderson. So it'll be, they're 26.5-point favorites. So we'll see if the Huskies can put up a fight whatsoever.
Yeah, UConn's got talent issues. I doubt it. Utah State was pretty good last year. If they put up any kind of game with the Aggies of Utah State, that bodes well for the Huskies. I expect a blowout. That is an interesting game though, because you're Jim Moore Jr. taking over a program that's been just probably the worst in FBS. Another one, you got Coach Jerry Keel returning to the sidelines, Bubba, at New Mexico State, as they take on Nevada in Las Cruces, and that game's gonna be on ESPN2, a rare nationally televised game for New Mexico State, a rare nationally televised home game as an independent. So that was an interesting one to me. Jerry Keel to New Mexico State seems like an odd fit, but going to be anxious to see what they look like.
And I know you brought up that Vanderbilt-Hawaii game, but very quickly going back to that, did you mention, who the coach for the Rainbow Warriors, I guess,
yeah, Todd Graham.
Warriors? Yeah. Well, it was Todd Graham, and, now it's Timmy Chang.
What happened to Todd Graham? They fired him after. Well, he was only there a year.
I'm pretty sure, right, Jason? I mean, you've heard.
It did.
Yeah, Timmy Chang, star, quarterback for the Warriors.
Well, how long was Graham there? He was only there a year, 2 years?
Maybe 2 years. It was very controversial and how the AD handled it. I know that I was following it a little bit on ESPN online, and
I missed the story. When did this go down?
In the last year, I believe, last season.
Okay.
It was interesting. But, Kyle, you mentioned something about, who we're watching and stuff. I'll just share this with you. We're all pulling for the Pirates, but all the Pirates are pulling for you, my man. So,
well, I appreciate that, man. I appreciate that. This has been the longest wait of my life. I've never in my life waited so long. You think when you get diagnosed with something like colon cancer that you're going to have surgery immediately, but sometimes it just don't work that way. Mm-hmm. I'm very very open what's going on with me. I'm having an EMR procedure Friday. If you don't know what that is, look it up. Yeah. As of right now, my surgery is then scheduled for September 20th. I'm doing what I can to see if I can't get that moved up, because boy, my anxiety is killing me, folks. If you want to know the worst part of cancer so far for me, it's the anxiety, it's the waiting. It is the absolute worst, the biggest mood swings. You're hopeful 1 minute, you're sad 1 minute, you're angry the next. And I can tell you what, I know there's going to be a lot more I got to go through physically with surgery and probably chemotherapy that's going to make all this look like a walk in the park. But so far, you want to know what's worse? It's the anxiety and the waiting. I'm so ready to move on to the next step. People say you got to fight. I'm ready to fight. I'm always ready for a fight, but you can't fight while you wait. So I'm ready to move on to the fighting part.
Well, ECU is known as rowdy, relentless fans, and we're also rowdy and relentless in our pulling for each other. So good luck, man.
I appreciate it. All the thoughts, prayers, positive vibes, whatever you believe, send it my way, and I'll appreciate it. And hopefully I get through this and, I come out on the other side this time next year thinking about, wow, that sucked. I'm done with it. Let's go.
Absolutely. That's what we'll be doing.
No doubt. And you've been in the thoughts and prayers of all of us here on our team. And I'm really glad you were able to join and chime in tonight, because I know you love talking Pirate football, and then obviously everything associated with it, like the conference realignment and so forth. But before we get out of here, guys, to promote some of our upcoming content, on Thursday we will catch up with Chad Brindle from the Bearcat Journal. He was originally scheduled for tonight, but we had to call an audible due to some scheduling conflicts. And then also Jeff Allen, who's affiliated with, not with UCF, but covers UCF and does the AAC report, does an excellent job with that. And then also a first-time guest in Frank Murtaugh from Memphis Magazine, and also covers the Memphis Tigers for another outlet or two, and has for quite some time now. So it's going to be a busy show on Thursday as we continue to take.
Yeah, Bubba must have got disconnected there, but I think he says we're going to continue to take a look at the upcoming Pirate football season and college football.
Jason in the private chat, Kyle, and that is Dave was able to attend the ECU football kickoff luncheon on Monday. He said there were 375, 400 folks in attendance. It was sold out in Minchie's Coliseum, and it was very well done. And he said, hats off to the administration for putting on a quality event.
Yeah, I saw pictures. It looked like it was well attended, well done, and
so
they even let Dave win a door prize.
I didn't know. You guys have anything else before we get out of here?
Guys, can you hear me?
I can. Yeah,
I don't think Bubba.
I think Bubba might be buffering.
I don't think Bubba
I think we're having some technical issues here. For Jason Tyndall and Kyle Barber, I'm Bubba Rosenbaum. You've been watching and listening to The Sports Objective. Have a great one, everyone. As always, go Pirates.
I'm a pirate down in my soul, and I don't back down, not at all. Find out when the cannons explode, from the sidelines down to the post. Put it down like not even close, all out to the last whistle blow. From the flag with the soul and crossbones. Everybody stand up, get your hands up, let our team know that we got they back. This is our house, this is our town, our time, Rebel 19, copy that. Everybody in the stands go bananas, scream loud, baby, don't hold back. Every foot, every yard, every first down, every touchdown with the cannons blast. Get it on, get it all, get the wave going like a